The hour to convene has arrived. We have 17 bills on the calendar, and we're going to, as chair this afternoon, I'm going to limit discussion to 5 minutes per. We're not voting on the bills. We're just assigning a committee today. Please and we will try to limit our questions, folks, if we can, on the committee. If you will, I'm going to start off with House Bill 272. Chairman Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me this opportunity. Is this thing working? Is it on?
You're on.
Okay, good. House Bill 272 is not a new issue to present to this committee. It's probably the, third, fourth, or fifth time in the last several years that this has been before. What House Bill 272 does is it will allow a state sales tax exemption, only a state sales tax exemption on energy that's used in the manufacturing process. It does not in any way affect local sales taxes, only the state. This bill is, I don't think any of you that's been on this committee before is a stranger to this issue. This issue is very, very critical to our manufacturers in this state. All of you know, probably every one of you have manufacturing constituents in your districts, and you probably know firsthand the difficult time they're having with all the costs that are associated with producing a product today. And unfortunately, too many of our manufacturers are going overseas. A lot of it is elements beyond our control, but something that we can help control in the state is this right here. Georgia is the only immediate southeastern state that imposes a sales tax period on energy. The state of Alabama imposes a tax, but it is a special energy sales tax set at approximately 1.57% of whatever they buy. This, when it comes to our economic development opportunities and retaining our current manufacturers, this sales tax really handicaps Georgia manufacturers and our prospects for economic recruitment and development. It severely handicaps us compared to our neighboring states. This past summer, we had 3 tax study committees that were formed, and I had the privilege of chairing the Business Incentive Tax Study, or the Business Incentive Study Committee. We heard a lot of good ideas. Most of them were tax-related ideas, and when it came time to hear from those who are in the manufacturing industry, this was one of 2 issues that they really brought to our attention with respect to taxes. And I think I may be a little bit biased, but I would say this is probably the most important one, or the most critical one, to our manufacturers around the state. Just to give you a few examples without mentioning names of companies firsthand. And
Mr. Lewis, you're running short.
I know.
On 5 minutes.
Anyway, I just want to tell you this, because some of you won't get to hear this in subcommittee, but we have one manufacturer in this state. In 2006, their 4% on electricity alone was $12.5 million. And we don't have a fiscal note yet. We'll deal with that when we get one, but I would suggest to you that the fiscal note would not at all compare to the potential loss to a local community if a manufacturer has to shut down for this reason coupled with other reasons. So I'll conclude there, Mr. Chairman, and try to answer any questions if you have any.
One question from the chair. Do you have a sunset provision in this bill?
I don't think there is one, and we don't need one.
Okay. Any other questions from members of the committee? We're going to assign this bill to the Sales Tax Subcommittee.
Thank you.
Next will be House Bill 169. Mr. Secretary, if you'll read.
HB 169 by Representative Martin, 47, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to exemptions from sales and use tax.
Representative Martin. Remember, I'm limiting you to 5 minutes, so.
In 5 minutes aggregate, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. House Bill 169, and I have a committee sub I'd like to offer that's going to include a sunset provision, so let me.
What's the LC number?
Well, the LC number I'm working off of is 186185S. That does not have the sunset. Ms. Kozel is pulling the document with the sunset. It's exactly the same as this bill, but it'll sunset in 09 as the chair requested.
I got you.
Sunset. Basically, I'd be real brief on this. Right now, we're in a situation where Georgia. By the way, my name is Chuck Martin. I represent the 47th District in Alpharetta in North Fulton. This bill simply seeks to allow restaurants that have prepared food left over at the end of their day to donate that food to qualified nonprofits, 501(c)(3)s, that provide relief for hungry Georgians. Currently, the way the statute reads, nobody really intended it that way, but the way the statute reads, if they donate that food, they are assessed a use tax because that food goes through and is consumed. If they throw that food in the dumpster, my understanding is, of course, it is not taxed. But this bill seeks to make sure that they are exempt from sales and use tax if they have prepared food left over at the end of the day, so that we don't get into a situation where our revenue department has to waste man hours and energy collecting tax on restaurants that wish to donate that food to provide for Georgia's hungry. There's also some language in there that talks about in the event of a natural disaster in a special circumstance where people would take prepared food and donate that they would not be subject to a sales or use tax. With that, I'll conclude and answer any questions. Ask the chair's favorable consideration to refer this to a subcommittee and have action as soon as possible.
We're going to assign this bill to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. Do I have any questions, Chairman Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we'll get Ms. Napier, the committee substitute, for forwarding on to that subcommittee with the sunset.
Just remain there. You've got some more coming. Next bill is House Bill 162. Mr. Secretary, will you read?
Still working on that aggregate 5 minutes, so I'm going to dispense with identification. Oh, okay. I thought I was working on an aggregate 5, Mr. Chairman. In that case, I'll breathe. Mr. Chairman, you do have a physical note on this bill, but basically this bill seeks to exempt from sales and use tax building materials used in certain facilities in Georgia that would, provided that their construction will bring more revenue into the local economy. It sunsets in June 2008. There's a fiscal note on this that assumes a $40 million cost and talks about a $2 million impact to the state. Actually, the facility that would most probably make use of this is up in North Fulton, is being built in coordination with the cities of Alpharetta, Roswell, North Fulton County, and the Atlanta Symphony, and be operated as a nonprofit. And we think the physical impact will actually be somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000, as the building materials will probably only be around $10 million. So the physical impact, I think, is going to be a little bit less than is stated here. It also has a sunset provision. I ask for the chair's favorable consideration to refer that to a proper subcommittee and action accordingly.
We're going to assign this bill to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. Do I have questions? Members of the committee? No questions, Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think you have the next bill also.
Yes.
House Bill 182 by Representative Martin. Mr. Secretary, if you'll read.
To the third of Representative Martin's legislative package to amend Code Section 48.5, Suit 274 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to the establishment of equalized justice property tax for the digest.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the committee's consideration again for the House Bill 182. House Bill 182 simply seeks to clarify some language that this committee, House and Senate, and the governor signed last year related to the creation of tax allocation districts. There seems to be some question as to the way property within a tax allocation district is accounted for. Let me be real brief in trying to describe what that is. If property is within a tax allocation district, that property, the incremental value on that property is not revenue from that incremental value is not passed along to the city or the county or the school board until those bonds are paid off. There's a situation whereby school boards are being asked to count that property, that incremental value, into their tax digest when calculating the formulas for statewide education funding. They shouldn't be required to pay in monies they don't receive yet. So we're trying to clarify that language and would ask the committee's favorable, or the chair's favorable consideration to refer this bill to proper subcommittee and appropriate action be taken.
We're going to assign this bill to the ad valorem tax subcommittee. Do I have any questions of the members of the committee? Any questions? Yes, ma'am. What's your number?
28, in more ways than one.
What'd she say?
Mr. Chairman, I apologize to the chair, and I apologize to Mr. Martin. I'm a little bit slow on the uptake here. Would it be possible for the chair to allow me to back up to House Bill 169 since the sponsor is the same and ask a question?
I'm sorry, madam. I was being paged over here on the right. Which bill do you want to go back to?
169.
That's fine. I'm sorry.
I'm with you.
All right.
Anything from our friend from North Georgia?
Well, can you answer the question? All right, go ahead.
Representative Martin, can I ask you a question about 169, paragraph C? Are we to assume that the people making the donation of the prepared food and beverages to a 501c3 would also expect to be getting a tax deduction for that contribution?
I think they may, but this bill is silent to that.
Well, you might want to make it a little louder then, because actually, I guess I've got the only concern I have in looking at that is the cost of the food and the beverages to the restaurants already been deducted in the cost of goods. I wouldn't want to construe that as meaning they'd get to deduct that cost 2 times.
Well, I mean, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be flippant with my answer to the lady when I say the bill's silent to that. The bill is silent to letting it be a deduction. There's nothing in this bill that could be construed or contracted to make the donation of those materials be deductible, in my opinion, and in that in consultation with the Legislative Council. If the lady reads that differently, I'll certainly address that, because that is not the intent, to allow a restaurant to have a double deduction. The intent is so that the revenue doesn't have to chase someone that would give away food for a very low amount of use tax. They could put a value on that of the food they're giving away of $1 and collect 7 cents or remit 7 cents to the state and get around the current law as it is. But it's a bit ridiculous to do all that paperwork when they're just trying to feed hungry people.
Thank you.
Are you any follow-on question? Do you want to ask revenue behind us on that?
No.
Okay. Okay. Next is House Bill 237 by Representative Martin. Mr. Secretary, will you please read?
Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to exemptions from state sales and use tax, so to change certain provisions regarding exemptions with respect to sale of certain manufacturing machinery.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Sims.
You've gone to the well a lot here now.
Yes, sir.
More ways than one.
And for all good measures that I hope the committee will give consideration to. House Bill 237 is what we'll refer to as the integrated plant theory. There exists a situation with Georgia manufacturing sales tax exemptions whereby our auditors from the Department of Revenue, and we heard this in Chairman Lewis's committee this summer, go out and try to determine what is directly related to manufacturing. And there sometimes is a lot of agitation and even litigation over what is directly used in manufacturing. A forklift isn't, but a conveyor belt is. The catwalk over a piece of manufacturing equipment isn't, but the manufacturing equipment itself is. The cooling tower outside the building isn't, but something that's closer to the process is. And what this bill seeks to do is to take the question out that if it is a piece of machinery that's integral and necessary to manufacturing of a product, then it is subject. It would be subject to the sales tax exemption. What we're trying to do here is working along with Revenue to get our auditors out of the engineering business, out of the litigation business and into the auditing business. And we've had some discussions with Revenue. We look forward to a lengthy period to go through this and a good conversation so that we can make the compliance easier in Georgia and try to attract more manufacturing jobs to the state of Georgia. Mr. Chairman, I asked you favorable consideration to refer this to the proper committee and look forward to working with them.
We're going to assign this to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. You got a question? Any questions, members of the committee? I've got one. Do you have a fiscal note, or have you got one on the works with this?
We have one ordered. We do not have that back in yet. We would have the hearing on that when the fiscal note returns.
Have you talked with the chairman about a sunset provision on this?
Yes.
We have?
We'll do that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we'll do that. We want to make that have that go in with the regular manufacturing exemption. So we need to marry that in with the current exemption.
Any questions, members of the committee? Thank you, Mr. Martin. Next on the list is Mr. Powell here.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. House Bill 59. Will you read, Mr. Secretary?
Or HB 59 by Representative Powell, the 29th, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to exemptions from sales and use tax so as to exempt from sales tax to water and sewer authorities created by local law.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and ladies and gentlemen. House Bill 59 would, in talking to Legislative Council, I've got a water sewer authority in Hart County created by a local act a few years ago. Did not specify in there that they would be exempt from paying sales tax when they buy materials for the installation of county water and sewer lines. We had attempted, or we had looked at possibly changing the legislative charter, and they said because of the Constitution we need to do a general act that would say specify that these type of water sewer authorities would be exempt from paying sales tax for materials that they use in installing those type of projects.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any questions of the author? We're going to assign this to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. Any questions? I think you've got your agenda here too today. You ready?
I'd just love to get them out of the way.
Okay. House Bill 271 by Representative Powell. Mr. Secretary, will you please read?
Part 7 of Article 10, Chapter 5, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to watercraft held in inventory.
Go ahead, Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Last year, the General Assembly, we passed a 2-year bill with a sunset for 2 years. It would allow those marine dealers that sell outboard motors or outboard boats and such that they'd be exempt from the inventory tax on those type of watercraft. Being from up at representing Lake Hartwell, we have several marine dealers up our way that are in competition with marine dealers over on the South Carolina side. And while this is going to work wonderfully for them for the next 2 years, after that it'll be sunset. What I've attempted doing here is to stretch it just a little bit further, or at least ways put this idea in some of the legislators' mind that this needs to be prolonged after the current 2-year term of that exemption.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any questions of the members of the committee? We're going to assign this bill to the Tax Reform Subcommittee. Okay. All right. Next is House Resolution 158 by Representative Powell and others. Will you please read, Mr. Secretary?
By Representative Powell, the 29th, proposing an amendment to the Constitution so as to require freezing of existing residential real property values and to provide that residual real property and interest therein shall be appraised for the ad valorem taxation purposes.
Go ahead, Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. What we're attempting to do in this resolution is to put forth some ideas that we need to do something because of the major problems that counties are having and property owners are having with the shifting of property values and the bureaucracy that surrounds that in each county. Not unlike, I believe, House Resolution 3 that put a 3% cap on, this just calls for the idea for your consideration to think about freezing residential property values until that property is sold and then put it back on at whatever the sales price would be.
Any questions? Members of the committee? If there's no questions, we're going to assign this bill to the ad valorem tax subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry. Next on the list is Mr. Franklin here?
Yes.
Okay, Chairman Franklin. House Bill 40 by Representative Franklin and others.
HB 40 to amend Code Section 48782 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated related to periods of limitation for assessment and collection of income taxes, and so as to authorize additional claims for refund of state income taxes following the claiming of allowing certain amended federal returns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Back in May of last year, the Georgia Court of Appeals pointed out to us that we have two conflicting code sections when it comes to filing an amended return for a refund. One of those sections says that we've got 3 years to file for an amended return for a refund. Another one of those sections tells us that if you file for an amended federal return and get a refund, you've got 180 days to file an amended state return for a state refund. This case that the appeals court decided in May of last year determined that even if you file for your amended state refund within 180 days, if that 180 days is outside the 3-year window of the other code section, you still can't get your refund. And they decided, they came down with trying to keep money in the Treasury. House Bill 40 sides with the taxpayer, says if you file within 180 days of your federal refund, you still get to file an amended return for a state refund.
Members of the committee, you have any questions? What's your number?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Franklin, my question goes to the fiscal note, and this may be a question that better addressed to the Department of Revenue. In the fiscal note, it says that Georgia pays 12% interest on refunds. Is that accurate? Are we currently? After a certain date. Thank you.
Any other questions? We're going to assign this bill to the Income Tax Subcommittee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is House Bill 161. Will you read, Mr. Secretary? Mr. Lunsford here. Representative Lunsford. Somebody go get him if he wants this bill. Mr. Roy, you going to read for him? No, sir. All right. Well, that was quick. Okay, we're going to go on. I'm going to skip Mr. Lunsford. He can go to the bottom of the list. We're going to House Bill 242. Representative Knox, will you please, Mr. Secretary?
Title 33 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated related to fees and taxes regarding insurance.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. Members of the committee, this is a bill familiar to the members of this committee. It's been before you before. As a matter of fact, I think in its current iteration, it is essentially the committee sub reincarnated that y'all passed out last year. It simply didn't have time to get to the House or the Senate, either one, for a vote. And basically it allows both the purchaser and the seller of health savings accounts to have additional tax consideration for the purchase of health savings accounts. There are a number of different entities that are advocating health savings accounts as a way to significantly cut into the cost of health care in this country. And I've had no opposition with respect to the underlying bill. Of course, we already sell health savings accounts in this state. The purpose of the bill is primarily to give the same benefits to small purchasers as corporations have when they purchase insurance for their employees. And secondly, to encourage companies to get out and market and sell this product. There are a lot of folks who would be better off with a product like this and who could actually afford this when they might not be able to afford some other product. But the product is not well known to the public. It needs to be marketed more, and I'm hoping that this will incentivize those companies to market the product.
Do you have any questions?
There is a fiscal note attached to the.
I got the fiscal note. Has everybody had a chance to look at the fiscal note?
I believe you saw this last year as well.
Yes, sir. My question is, who are you going to shift this to?
I'm sorry?
The loss, where's the shift going to go?
Well, I guess you could consider it a shift. Actually, I think what will happen is that the the loss in the premium revenue and the tax revenue would be compensated for by the decrease in the cost of providing care for folks who might not otherwise have coverage, or folks that don't have sufficient coverage, or for folks who have to give up their coverage because of the increasing cost of premiums. So, you know, when you look at a state that has, in the Indigent Care Trust Fund, we're spending something like between $400 and $500 million for people who do not have insurance for whatever reason. This product can be available to a lot of folks who don't have it and can't afford it. So I don't see this. I see it net as a gain for the state in spite of the loss in premium tax. If they don't sell anything, we don't have any.
I understand.
No tax consequences whatsoever.
It's been my opinion and in my opinion, that I haven't seen health costs go down ever. And so I don't see how this is going to make them go down.
Well, I can tell you this, that it's not going to go down as long as the government is the only payer. As long as we're 80% of the market, it's not going to go down. The government's a primary mover in it. This is a private enterprise operation right here.
Gotcha.
One of the reasons people can't afford insurance now is because only about 20% of the market is still commercial insurance. The rest of it is government pay, like our state health plan, city and county health plans, and Medicare, Medicaid, Peach Care, all those sort of things. So, you know, basically what it does is all of the profit in the healthcare industry comes out of commercial insurance. That's 20% of the market. This would be a way of cutting into that and trying to improve and increase the size of that market so that costs can come down. This is a great way to do it. There's nobody argues with this underlying product.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Knox, in looking at the fiscal note, I see that there's actually two provisions in the fiscal note.
Right.
One would exempt from the state premium tax 2.25% of the premiums that the insurers would collect from Georgia residents. Now, what effect will that have on the insurance premium tax dollars that are currently being shared with local governments?
There'd be some diminution in that. I don't know what the amount would be. All I'm looking at here is I'm looking at the same thing you are, and I can't really tell you what that is. Although I will say that none of the local governments, I didn't just bring this today. This was in last year. We're already selling the product as it is now. And nobody's come to me yet and said, this is a bad idea, we don't want you to do it, it's going to kill us.
Any other questions?
I guess not.
Okay. We're going to assign this to the Income Tax Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Next on the list is House Bill 260 by Representative Jacobs. Mr. Secretary, will you please read?
260. By Representative Jacobs of the 80th. To amend Article 3, Chapter 82 of Title 38 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to revenue bonds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 260 is a good fiscal accountability measure. It is designed to ensure that single local jurisdiction authorities obtain approval from the governing authority of the county or municipality in which their jurisdiction is encompassed for the purposes for which they seek to float revenue bonds. There is an exemption currently in the bill for economic development authorities. I have talked with some bond lawyers about other possible exemptions that might be worked out in subcommittee. I'm certainly not trying to pull in within the sweep of this bill private activity bonds, but I would ask for the committee's favorable consideration and assignment to subcommittee.
Any questions, members of the committee? If not, we're going to assign this to the Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Millar, are you here? Okay. House Bill 264, Mr. Secretary, will you please read?
Representative Miller of the 79th. To amend Article 2A of Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to homestead options, sales, and use tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You all passed this bill last year, and it was held up because of the cityhood of Dunwoody was being held up at the time. What this does, in 1998, DeKalb County established a homestead option sales tax, and at the time, the cities and the counties agreed how they were going to share the proceeds. Later on, the county decided they didn't want to share the proceeds in that manner, and they've been in court ever since. What this bill does, it does not interfere with this court case. It deals with going forward, and if Dunwoody or another jurisdiction would incorporate, all it does is say that Dunwoody get the same amount of homestead option sales tax credits if they were incorporated versus being unincorporated. I've actually got a note here. It's a 4-page note that was been given to Chairman O'Neill. I don't know if you all have it, from Paula Yeary from the Carl Vinson Institute, and she said the calculations in the bill was correct. And what I would do is have her come to the subcommittee hearing to present at that point in time.
We don't have that in the file.
All right, well, I gave it to Chairman O'Neill last
I understand. You bring that to subcommittee.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to try to get her to come over from the Carl Vinson Institute to testify that the calculations are correct.
Very good. Any members of the committee have any questions? Okay.
Thank you. I have not had a chance to read the bill carefully. I just want to add, so it sounds like this would be, if this were passed, then it would be an incentive for the incorporation of the city of Dunwoody. Is that correct?
Yeah, what it would do, basically we would get about $1.6 million. It would flow directly to the city of Dunwoody versus DeKalb County, and in turn about $1.5 million is going to go to the Perimeter Community Improvement District, is what we're planning to do with the money.
Thank you.
And what it means is DeKalb County doesn't touch the money.
Any following questions? Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to assign this to the Sales Tax Subcommittee.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next is House Resolution 48 by Representative Rogers. Will you read, please, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 48 by Representative Rogers of the 26th, proposing an amendment to the Constitution so as to provide funds derived from sales and use and motor fuel taxes with respect to jet fuel and aviation gasoline may be appropriated for and grants made for all activities and incidents and providing for maintaining of adequate systems in public use airports, so on and so forth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the permission of the chair, I realized this was going to be a hearing, but I didn't know you were going to limit it to 5 minutes. And I know in the past I've listened to you more than 5 minutes. I do have a speaker here, and if you disagree, I'd like to have a vote of the committee. Okay. Anyway, this is House Resolution 48, and what I'd like to do at this time, each one of you have a handout about Georgia airports, and I'm going to ask the president of the Georgia Airport Association to briefly go through it, and I invited him to come about 4 o'clock.
And again, I was trying to get to you because I knew you did have a speaker today. So.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I don't do speeches, so this will probably take about 90 seconds. The handout I put in front of you, the top page is the summary that I'm going to briefly go over. The next 3 pages are the source document. The source document is the Georgia Aviation Systems Plan. Was commissioned in roughly the year 2000 and was completed in 2003, and it took a 20-year approach to the facility needs and service objectives of Georgia's public use airports, not including Hartsfield-Jackson International. Established 3 levels of airports. A level 1 is the minimum standard, the minimum standard at which an airport can really be an airport. Level 2 is a business airport of local impact, and a level 3 airport is a commercial airport or a regional business airport of regional impact. The systems plan estimated in 2003 that $313 million. Tell him my name, Mike Van Wee. Sorry. The systems plan estimated that $313 million was going to be required over the next 20 years to meet the facility objectives of the plan. Currently, airports and aviation contribute an estimated $2.5 billion in direct, indirect economic benefits to the state. Aviation activities alone contribute about $35 million in jet and aviation fuel tax revenue,
aviation goods and services about $31 million, aircraft sales about $4 million, and ad valorem taxes about $35 million. House Resolution 48, as I've read it, proposes to amend the Constitution so that the tax revenue from aviation gasoline and jet fuel is budgeted for airport development through the Georgia Aviation Programs Office. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rogers, do you want to come up in the well, too? Any questions? Any questions, members of the committee? Okay. I don't think we have any questions. We're going to assign this to the Sales Tax Subcommittee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Stevens, is he here? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What number are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll present from the desk if you don't mind. This House Bill 282 is sales and use exemption for certain aircraft, specifically primarily derived and directed to Gulfstream. And it's currently Gulfstream, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just explain a little bit, currently employs 5,000 employees in Savannah and Brunswick, that manufacturing as many as 90 high-end aircraft every year. Gulfstream's service business has a tremendous potential for growth and job creation, including a new 1,100 new job facility that's recently announced for the expansion in Savannah. To remain competitive in this industry, the repair business, Gulfstream needs the legislature to exempt their aircraft repair parts from the Georgia sales tax. The majority of other states already have this exemption. Planes are easily portable, and by definition, so it's easy for the aircraft owner to choose a repair facility that may be in another state. And this is the real meat of the bill, Mr. Chairman. There's some specific reasons the fiscal impact of the bill on the state would be very, very limited. First, all commercial aircraft carriers like Delta and AirTran already enjoy this exemption. Secondly, government work like those done in Lockheed Martin is already exempt from the sales tax exemption. And third, and the most important reason for this bill, the flyaway clause means this bill only applies to those aircraft that come in from out of state. Those based in Georgia will still be charged the sales tax. So this is one of those exemptions that only applies to aircraft that come in from outside the state of Georgia. The original fiscal note, Mr. Chairman, was rather large because it encompassed all of the aircraft in the state of Georgia, including the big commercial carriers, which was an error. We're having a new one redrawn. We expect it to be about $1 to $2 million, and I urge the committee to act on this and put it in favorable committee for consideration.
Okay, we do have a question. 18. What was that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why the great bill? Why not? Why are we excluding planes that are state residents? Why not go ahead and include them in the exemption?
I'm still number 3. Thank you. The biggest thing we're trying to do is to make Gulfstream more competitive with other states, and that would be, I wouldn't oppose that at all. But again, those residents that are already in the state of Georgia, whose planes are based in the state of Georgia, are already paying the tax. And this is to make sure that we don't become less competitive to those other states that want to fly their aircraft in instead of going to Texas to have their aircraft repaired.
Any other questions? No other questions. We're going to assign this to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. Is Mr. Day here? Mr. Lunsford, you lucked out. You come on up with yours. Go back to you find it. House Bill 161, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I had business.
Wait, let him read first. I'm sorry. You're going to read the header.
HB 161, Representative Lunsford, the 110th, to amend Title 3248 Official Code of Georgia annotated relating respectively to highways, bridges, and ferries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to the members of this committee. I was attending to business elsewhere in the Capitol, so I wasn't here on time and manner. I do apologize for that. This bill is actually a fairly simple piece of legislation. I know we've heard that many times, but I tell you, it came about as just an idea. As I was listening to the Department of Transportation and local governments cry and moan about the shortage of highway money and the shortage of money for transportation, I was meeting with the Deputy Commissioner for DOT and a group of others, Mr. Stutzel and some others, and we were discussing a road in particular that happened to be Salem Road and I-20. And when that was originally put on the DOT's repair list to fix that road, I believe it was about a $12 million project, and it keeps getting put into long range, and I think now it's in no range. But because of that process, it went from about $12 million total project cost to $45 million total project cost, with $30 million of it being right-of-way acquisition. So the majority of the money in that particular project was just acquiring the right-of-way. So in my quest to try to figure out a different way to skin the cat in the state of Georgia, because we don't apparently have enough money to purchase all the right-of-way and build all the roads that we need to build, I was thinking of a way we could do it, and a typical example to summarize it, and to say this bill is in its total finished form would be incorrect. I think it needs some work, but I was hoping that this committee could help with that. And for instance, if you had right-of-way you were going to sell to the state for the front of your yard, currently, if, say, for instance, as an example, the state paid you $10,000 for your right-of-way, by the time you really paid your state and federal taxes on that money, you're only going to really net about $7,000. And many times that's what causes a lot of the grief in right-of-way acquisitions, is the real net's not that great. The other part of it is that local governments continue to not reassess the value of your property after the right-of-way acquisition. And so another part of this bill, another function of, is it forces the local governments to immediately assess the value of your property minus the right-of-way you just sold. Now, I think that's the fairest time in the value of the entire ownership of the property when you know what it's truly worth by the foot, because someone has just determined what it's worth by the foot, and we've now reduced your property based on the right-of-way acquisition. But what this bill simply says is, if you're the owner of the property, you have a choice of taking that cash money or taking a tax credit that would be 120% of the value of the money they were going to offer you. To sum it up, what it essentially does is it allows the landowners in the state of Georgia to float bonds for the state of Georgia at 0% interest, because they're going to actually hold the note and give you a tax credit used for up to 5 years for the purchase of their property, without the local government or the state government expending cash immediately today. And if you sell that property and don't use the whole tax credit during that 5-year period of time, the state actually saved money. But that's really truly consumer choice, because the consumer had the choice of which way they want to do it. That's kind of a short, sweet, and simple version of it. I'll be happy to answer any questions if I can, sir.
Any questions, members of the committee? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lunsford, would you tell me again the percentage that the tax credit would be of the value of the property? Did I miss that?
No, ma'am. I think what you'll find is it's on page 2 on line 12, and it would be the cash acquisition cost offered to the taxpayer plus 20% of that cost, in addition to the cash. And that
but
would
this
then
is going to be a credit.
It would be a tax credit. That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
And normally a tax credit is considered to be much more valuable than just a deduction, because your tax credit comes off your total tax liability. Is that correct?
Well, that was my assumption, but I could be wrong.
Under normal circumstances, when right-of-way is sold to the DOT and the owner receives a cash compensation for it, there's a taxable amount of that transaction for state income tax and federal income tax purposes. If a person is allowed to take a tax credit in lieu of, how is the difference in what that property owner has invested in the property and the compensation they're receiving for it? How is that going to be taxed? How are we going to arrive at a tax on that?
Well, you know, that is the wonderful part of this bill, Representative Jameson. I haven't figured it all out.
Well, then that makes 2 of us.
Okay. However, what I am trying to determine in this process is that I was trying to develop a process that could become a win-win-win situation. The homeowner wins because they truly get fair market value plus something for doing it. The state would win because they're not expending immediate cash for the procurement of the right-of-way. The local government would win because they're not having to match the cost for the right-of-way acquisition with the state government. And then the state ultimately wins because it is a long-term tax credit over a 5-year period of time. So in essence, we're purchasing property, paying for it tomorrow, but purchasing it at today's prices. So even with the 20% variance, I assume that over a 5-year period of time, it is appreciated higher in value than that. And that was the purpose behind the idea.
Any further questions?
Not from me.
Ms. Jameson, you're going to get another shot at him because I'm going to assign this, if there are no other questions, to the Public Finance Subcommittee. You've got two different areas here, and one's income, one's ad valorem. It's minimal on the ad valorem, but I think we're going to put it over into that committee.
Mr. Chairman, wherever you see best.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Day is not here, but I think Chairman Stevens is going to read his bill, and this is House Bill 298. And before you read, I just want to tell you thank you. We've moved right along. We've done this in 45 minutes. That's pretty good for 17 bills. And I thank you, and thank you for the indulgence of the committee. If you will, Mr. Secretary, please read.
HB 298 by Representative Day, Representative Stevens, to amend Code Section 48.5, 48.4 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to tax exemptions for unremarried surviving spouses of peace officers and firefighters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 298 addresses a significant problem, even though the numbers are relatively minor. Whenever a police officer or a firefighter lose their life in the line of duty, this bill brings forward the homestead exemption for the full value of the property for the homestead for the surviving spouse, so long as they are not remarried.
Any questions, members of the committee? No questions. We're going to send this to the ad valorem tax subcommittee. Before we leave, do we have any announcements, Lindsay? Okay. Are we going to meet any more this week? Okay. As far as we know, we're not going to meet any more this week. If there are no other further questions or further discussion, we stand adjourned.